The detention cell aboard the Confederation flagship Eternal Dominion hummed with the subtle vibration of exotic matter engines, a sound that had become as familiar to Marcus Chen as his own heartbeat over the past 3 cycles. The translucent energy barriers that held him cast an eerie blue glow across his weathered features, highlighting the stubborn set of his jaw that had gotten him into this mess in the first place. Marcus pressed his palm against the cool metal wall and closed his eyes, remembering the day everything changed. 6 months ago, he had been Captain Chen of the Earth Defense Corps, commanding the frontier patrol ship Defiance Edge along the disputed border zones. Earth was still considered a minor player in galactic politics, barely 3 decades into their membership in the Galactic Confederation. Teddy. Humans were seen as useful but unremarkable. Good soldiers, decent engineers, but lacking the advanced telepathic abilities of the Xenothari or the natural space-time manipulation talents of the Vorthak. That perception had served humanity well, allowing them to develop quietly while the major powers focused on each other. Marcus had been content with that arrangement until the morning his routine patrol intercepted a distress signal from a civilian transport carrying Xenothari refugees. The ship was under attack by Korthak raiders, notorious for their slave trading operations in the outer systems. Standard Confederation protocol was clear: assess the situation, call for appropriate backup, and avoid engagement with superior forces. The Korthak battlecruiser outgunned Marcus's patrol ship by a factor of 10. By the time proper military response arrived, the refugees would be gone, sold into the brutal mining operations of the Korthak Empire. Marcus had made his choice in that moment, ordering his crew to engage. The battle was fierce and desperate. Using hit-and-run tactics and the superior maneuverability of human-designed ships, they had managed to disable the Korthak vessel's engines and rescue the transport. But victory came at a cost. 2 of his crew members died in the engagement, and the Defiance Edge suffered critical damage. The aftermath should have been straightforward. Marcus expected a reprimand for violating protocol, perhaps a demotion, but the refugees were safe and the Korthak threat neutralized. Instead, he found himself facing a tribunal of Confederation officials who seemed more concerned with his unauthorized action than the lives he had saved. Captain Chen, the presiding magistrate, a tall Vorthak with crystalline skin that reflected the chamber's lights, had intoned during the proceedings, "Your actions, while perhaps well-intentioned, represent a dangerous precedent." Marcus had stood straight, his hands clasped behind his back in the formal military posture he had maintained throughout the trial. "With respect, Magistrate, those protocols would have resulted in the deaths or enslavement of 300 innocent beings." The magistrate's expression had remained impassive, a trait common to his species. "The greater good sometimes requires difficult choices, Captain. Individual acts of heroism, while admirable in isolated context, can undermine the stability that protects billions." That was when Marcus truly understood the nature of the Confederation. It wasn't an alliance of equals working toward common goals. It was a carefully orchestrated system of control, designed to maintain the power of a few advanced species while keeping the newer members in line. Humanity's rapid military advancement and independence streak made them a potential threat to this balance. The tribunal's verdict had been swift and unexpected. Rather than court-martial or imprisonment, Marcus was sentenced to voluntary service in the Cosmic Union, an elite military unit that handled the Confederation's most sensitive operations. It was presented as an honor, a chance for humanity to prove their worth among the galaxy's finest warriors. In reality, it was exile wrapped in ceremony. The Cosmic Union was the Confederation's most tightly controlled military force, composed of members from various species who had, for one reason or another, become inconvenient to their home governments. Some were exiles, others were volunteers seeking advancement, but all were bound by neural conditioning that ensured absolute loyalty to Confederation command. The process was invasive but subtle, leaving the subject's personality intact while creating an unbreakable compulsion to follow orders. Or so they thought. Marcus opened his eyes as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside his cell. The energy barrier flickered and dissolved, revealing Commander Zefka, the Vorthak officer who served as his liaison during the transition process. The commander's crystalline features caught the corridor's harsh lighting, creating a prism effect across his angular face. "It is time, Captain Chen," Zevka announced, his voice carrying the formal cadence typical of his species. "The neural conditioning chamber awaits." Marcus stood slowly, working the stiffness from his joints after hours of meditation. "I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday," he said, falling into step beside the commander as they walked through the ship's corridors. "About the Union being a path to redemption. Many who enter our ranks initially resist the transition. It is natural to fear change, but you will find that service to the greater good brings its own rewards." The corridors of the Eternal Dominion were a testament to Confederation engineering prowess. Walls of polished metal were inlaid with flowing patterns of energy conduits that provided both illumination and data transmission. The ship housed nearly 50,000 beings from a dozen species, yet moved with the efficiency of a single organism. It was beautiful in its way, Marcus admitted to himself, but it was also sterile, a perfection achieved by suppressing the chaos and unpredictability that made life interesting. They passed observation decks where other inductees waited their turn. Marcus recognized a few faces from the briefing materials he had studied. There was Captain Veltai of the Corvani, whose crime had been questioning a direct order that would have resulted in civilian casualties. Near a viewport stood Lieutenant Morgic, a hegemony officer whose only fault was showing too much initiative during a border skirmish. Each had been selected not for their failures, but for their potential to think independently, a trait the Confederation wanted to harness while carefully controlling. The neural conditioning chamber occupied an entire deck of the massive vessel. As they entered the preparation area, Marcus was struck by the clinical efficiency of the operation. Dozens of beings moved through various stages of the process, attended by medical technicians who worked with the detached professionalism of factory workers. This wasn't a medical procedure, it was industrial conditioning. "The process is painless," Zevka assured him as they approached the central chamber. "You will experience a brief period of disorientation as the neural pathways are established, then clarity beyond anything you have known. The doubts and moral conflicts that have plagued your career will be resolved." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "What about creativity, innovation? The things that make military service more than just following orders? Enhanced, not eliminated?" the commander replied. "You will find your tactical abilities improved, your decision-making more efficient. The conditioning does not suppress capability, it focuses it toward proper channels." The chamber itself was a sphere of polished metal suspended in a web of energy conduits. Technicians moved around its base, making final preparations. Through the transparent aluminum viewing ports, Marcus could see the interior, a simple chair surrounded by neural interface arrays that would map and modify his brain patterns. Dr. S. Yethmar, the chief medical officer overseeing the conditioning process, approached with a data pad in her six-fingered hands. She was Xenothari, her skin bearing the subtle blue tinge that indicated high telepathic sensitivity. Her species had been among the first to perfect neural conditioning, using it initially to treat mental disorders, before adapting it for military applications. "Captain Chen," she said, her mental voice reaching him directly while her physical voice provided translation for the other species present, "I have reviewed your psychological profile. Your neural pathways show remarkable resistance to external influence, a trait common to your species, but rarely seen to this degree. Perhaps human mental architecture was more resistant to conditioning than the Confederation realized. Is that going to be a problem?" Dr. Yethmar made the gesture equivalent to a shrug among her people. "It simply means the process will require additional time and precision. We have successfully conditioned members of every known sapient species. Humans present interesting challenges, but nothing we cannot overcome." As they spoke, Marcus noticed something the others seemed to miss. The neural interface arrays in the chamber were based on Xenothari technology, designed for species with telepathic abilities. The modifications for non-telepathic races were clearly secondary additions, adaptations rather than original design features. This wasn't just about controlling minds. It was about imposing telepathic influence on species that had evolved beyond such vulnerability. Doctor, Marcus said carefully, I'm curious about the theoretical basis for the conditioning. My understanding is that it works by creating artificial neural pathways that override natural decision-making processes. The Xenothari physician's large eyes showed a flicker of surprise at his technical knowledge. That is a simplified but essentially accurate description. We create what you might call loyalty circuits, neural patterns that generate positive emotional responses to Confederation authority, while creating discomfort when considering actions contrary to our interests. And this doesn't interfere with independent thought? Independent thought is preserved within acceptable parameters, Dr. Yethmar explained. You will retain your personality, your memories, your tactical abilities. You will simply find yourself naturally inclined toward choices that serve the greater good of the Confederation. Marcus nodded slowly, but his mind was racing. The neural conditioning wasn't just about loyalty. It was about creating a specific type of soldier. The Confederation wanted warriors who could think independently when it served their purposes, but who would never question the fundamental order of galactic society. It was a perfect system for maintaining control while appearing to value individual contribution. The preparation process took another hour. Marcus underwent medical scans, psychological evaluations, and briefings on the technical aspects of the conditioning. Throughout it all, he maintained an attitude of curious cooperation, asking technical questions and expressing what appeared to be growing acceptance of his situation. When they finally led him to the chamber, Marcus paused at the entrance. Commander Zevka, may I ask you something personal? The Vorthak officer inclined his head slightly. Of course, Captain. Do you remember what it felt like before the conditioning? Do you ever wonder what choices you might have made with a completely free mind? For just a moment, something flickered behind the commander's crystalline eyes, a shadow of doubt, or perhaps nostalgia. Then it was gone, replaced by the serene certainty that marked all the conditioned officers Marcus had met. I remember confusion, Zevka said finally, conflict between duty and personal desire. The conditioning brought clarity and purpose. I have never been more effective as an officer or more content as an individual. Marcus stepped into the chamber and settled into the chair. The neural interfaces descended around his head like a metallic crown, their contact points cool against his skin. Through the viewing ports, he could see the technicians at their stations, preparing to begin the process that would supposedly transform him into the perfect Confederation soldier. As the preliminary scans began, Marcus closed his eyes and focused on a memory from his childhood on Earth. He was 8 years old, sitting in his grandfather's workshop while the old man repaired a centuries-old mechanical watch. The delicate gears and springs fascinated young Marcus, but what stayed with him was his grandfather's explanation of how the timepiece worked. "See, boy," his grandfather had said, pointing to the intricate mechanism, "every part has to work perfectly for the whole thing to function. But the most important part isn't any of these gears or springs, it's the escapement mechanism. That's what controls the release of energy, what keeps everything running at the right speed. Without it, all this complexity is just expensive junk." At the time, Marcus hadn't fully understood the lesson. Now, as neural probes mapped his brain patterns in preparation for conditioning, the meaning became crystal clear. The Confederation was like that watch, a complex mechanism where every component had its role, but they had made a crucial error in their calculations. They assumed that by controlling the loyalty circuits, they could predict and direct human behavior. They had never encountered a species that had spent millennia learning to hide their true thoughts even from themselves. The conditioning process began with a subtle tingling sensation as the neural interfaces established contact with his brain tissue. Marcus felt the probes mapping his neural pathways, identifying the structures associated with loyalty, authority, and moral decision-making. The Xanathari technology was remarkably sophisticated, capable of reading and modifying brain patterns with surgical precision. But precision was only valuable if you understood what you were modifying. As the first conditioning impulses began, Marcus drew upon techniques he had learned not from military training, but from his grandmother's meditation practices. She had been a practitioner of an ancient human discipline that taught students to compartmentalize their minds, to create mental barriers that could withstand even telepathic intrusion. The human government had quietly encouraged such practices after first contact with telepathic species, recognizing them as a crucial defense against mental manipulation. Marcus felt the conditioning protocols attempting to establish their loyalty circuits, creating the neural pathways that would bind him to Confederation authority. He didn't resist. Resistance would be detected immediately. Instead, he allowed the circuits to form while simultaneously creating deeper hidden pathways that remained untouched by the modification process. To external scanners, the conditioning appeared completely successful. In reality, Marcus retained full autonomy over his thoughts and decisions, with the conditioned responses serving as a convincing facade. The process took 6 hours. When it was complete, Marcus opened his eyes to find Dr. Yethmar studying the readouts with satisfaction. "Remarkable," she said, both aloud and telepathically. "The neural integration is nearly perfect. Your conditioning has taken hold with exceptional stability." Marcus sat up slowly, allowing a look of serene contentment to cross his features. The expression was genuine in its own way. He was content, but not for the reasons they assumed. "I feel different, clearer. The conflicts that used to trouble me seem so unnecessary now." Commander Zefka stepped forward, his crystalline face reflecting approval. "Welcome to the Cosmic Union, Brother Chen. You will find your new clarity serves you well in the challenges ahead." As they led him from the chamber, Marcus maintained his facade of successful conditioning while his mind raced with possibilities. The Confederation had just made him privy to their most sensitive military operations, while believing they had ensured his absolute loyalty. They had given him access to advanced technology, classified intelligence, and the confidence of the galaxy's most powerful leaders. They thought they had gained a perfectly controlled human soldier. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous, a human agent with the freedom to act and the knowledge to act effectively. Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he walked through the corridors of the Eternal Dominion. The Confederation was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had never been their technology or their numbers. It was their ability to surprise those who underestimated them. The induction ceremony took place in the ship's main assembly hall, a vast chamber capable of holding thousands of beings. Representatives from across the Confederation had gathered to witness the latest group of inductees formally join the Cosmic Union. Marcus stood with his fellow new members presenting the image of a perfectly conditioned soldier, while his unconditioned mind cataloged everything he observed. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. The hall's architecture seemed designed to inspire awe and submission, with soaring ceilings that disappeared into shadow and walls bearing the symbols of 100-member worlds. At the center of the chamber stood a holographic representation of the Galactic Confederation's founding charter, its words scrolling endlessly in dozens of languages. High Admiral Koreth Nal, the Vorthak commander of the Cosmic Union, delivered the keynote address. His species' natural ability to manipulate gravitational fields created subtle effects around him as he spoke, making his words seem to carry physical weight. "You have been chosen," he declared, his voice resonating through the chamber's acoustic enhancement systems, "not as punishment for past errors in judgment, but as recognition of your potential to serve something greater than yourselves. The Cosmic Union represents the finest military tradition in galactic history, warriors bound not by species loyalty or personal ambition, but by shared dedication to peace, order, and the protection of all sapient life." Marcus listened to the speech while simultaneously analyzing the defensive systems he could observe. The hall's security was impressive but not impregnable. Energy barriers protected the VIP viewing areas, armed guards were positioned at strategic points, and sensor arrays monitored everything from air composition to neural activity levels. It was the kind of security designed to prevent conventional attacks or assassination attempts. It wasn't designed to stop someone who appeared completely loyal from gathering intelligence. After the ceremony, the new inductees were assigned to their initial postings. Marcus found himself selected for the Union's Strategic Operations Division, the elite unit responsible for missions too sensitive for regular Confederation forces. His commanding officer was Colonel Zendar, a hegemony officer whose own conditioning was so thorough that he radiated absolute certainty in the righteousness of their cause. Your psychological profile indicates exceptional tactical flexibility, the colonel explained during Marcus's briefing. Combined with your species' natural resilience and your successful conditioning, this makes you ideal for deep insertion operations in politically sensitive areas. Marcus nodded respectfully. I'm honored by the assignment, sir. When do we begin? Immediately. We have received intelligence regarding possible separatist activity in the Kepler sector. Several member worlds have been showing signs of political instability, and there are concerns about potential rebellion. Your first mission will be to investigate these reports and, if necessary, take corrective action. The briefing materials Colonel Zendar provided were illuminating. The Kepler sector contained 12 inhabited systems, most of which had joined the Confederation within the last century. They were what diplomats euphemistically called developing worlds. Civilizations that had achieved interstellar travel but lacked the advanced technologies that would make them major players in galactic politics. Recent intelligence reports suggested that several of these worlds were secretly coordinating with each other, potentially preparing to withdraw from the Confederation. Such action would be legally permissible under the terms of their membership, but politically unacceptable to the established powers. The loss of the Kepler sector would create a power vacuum that might encourage other member worlds to reconsider their own relationships with Confederation authority. Marcus studied the files with genuine interest, though not for the reasons his superiors assumed. The developing worlds represented exactly the kind of independent thinking that had gotten him into this situation. If they were indeed planning to assert their sovereignty, they would need allies with both the will and the capability to help them succeed. His first mission was scheduled to begin within 48 hours. The transport ship Unified Purpose would carry him and a small team of specialists to the sector capital at HFY Prime, where they would establish a listening post and begin surveillance operations. It was exactly the kind of routine intelligence mission that would allow him to assess the situation while appearing to serve Confederation interests. As Marcus prepared for deployment, he reflected on the path that had brought him to this moment. 6 months ago, he had been a loyal Confederation officer who believed in the system's potential for good despite its flaws. The trial and conditioning process had opened his eyes to the true nature of galactic politics. The Confederation wasn't an alliance of equals. It was an empire that maintained control through careful manipulation of law, custom, and individual psychology. But empires, Marcus knew from human history, were only as strong as the loyalty they could command. The Confederation had made a critical error in believing that loyalty could be manufactured through neural conditioning. They had created a perfect soldier on the surface while leaving his deeper motivations untouched. Now they were sending that soldier into a situation where his human instincts for independence and justice could do the most damage to their carefully maintained order. Marcus smiled as he packed his equipment for the mission ahead. The Confederation thought they had neutralized a potential threat by transforming him into a loyal servant. Instead, they had created something much more dangerous, a human agent with the freedom to act according to his own moral compass while possessing the trust and resources of the galaxy's most powerful military force. The game was about to begin, and for the first time since his trial, Marcus felt truly optimistic about the outcome. Humanity had always been at its best when facing impossible odds. The Confederation was about to discover just how dangerous it could be to underestimate the species they thought they had tamed. His next move would indeed leave all worlds stunned. but not in the way anyone expected. The transport ship Unified Purpose dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system with the characteristic shimmer of exotic matter drive cycling down. Marcus stood in the observation deck, watching the distant star grow larger as they approached Kepler Prime. Around him, his assigned team made final preparations for their intelligence mission, each member displaying the calm efficiency that marked all conditioned soldiers of the Cosmic Union. Lieutenant Sarah Kine, their communications specialist, was a Xenothari whose telepathic abilities made her invaluable for monitoring local thought patterns and detecting deception. Her conditioning was so thorough that she genuinely believed the Confederation's cause was righteous, making her both an asset and a potential obstacle to Marcus's true objectives. Sergeant Bractor represented the muscle of their operation. The massive Corvani warrior stood nearly 3 meters tall, his thick hide scarred from a dozen campaigns. His people were natural soldiers, and the conditioning had only enhanced their already formidable loyalty to military hierarchy. He would follow orders without question, making him predictable but dangerous. The most interesting member of their team was Dr. Lyra Venn, a hegemony scientist whose expertise in xenopsychology made her essential for understanding the motivations of potentially rebellious worlds. Unlike the others, her conditioning seemed less complete. Marcus had noticed subtle signs of independent thought during their briefings, suggesting that her scientific training provided some resistance to mental manipulation. Approaching orbital insertion point, announced the ship's pilot through the communication system. Estimated arrival at Kepler Prime in 6 hours. Marcus turned from the viewport and addressed his team. Remember, our official mission is routine intelligence gathering. We're here to assess political stability and identify any potential security threats. The locals must see us as diplomatic observers, not military investigators. Lieutenant Sarah Kine nodded, her large eyes reflecting the starlight from the viewing port. My telepathic range will allow monitoring of surface populations once we establish orbit. If there is organized descent, I should be able to detect it within the first few days. Excellent, Marcus replied, though privately he hoped the Xenothari's abilities wouldn't detect his own carefully hidden thoughts. Dr. Lyra Venn, I want you to focus on cultural analysis. Understanding how these worlds view their relationship with the Confederation will be crucial to predicting their behavior. The hegemony scientist consulted her data pad. Initial reports suggest these civilizations place high value on individual planetary sovereignty. This could create natural resistance to Confederation integration protocols. Sergeant Bractor shifted his considerable bulk, armor plates clicking softly. If resistance becomes active, standard pacification protocols remain available. Marcus kept his expression neutral while his mind recoiled at the casual mention of pacification protocols. He had read the classified files describing how the Confederation dealt with rebellious worlds. The process began with economic pressure, escalated through political manipulation, and ultimately culminated in military intervention disguised as peacekeeping operations. Entire civilizations had been reduced to client states through these methods, their independence sacrificed to maintain galactic stability. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Marcus said diplomatically. Our goal is prevention, not cure. The Unified Purpose settled into a standard diplomatic orbit around Kepler Prime, a world that reminded Marcus painfully of Earth. Blue oceans covered 60% of the surface, broken by 4 major continents that showed clear signs of advanced civilization. The planet's single moon was heavily industrialized, serving as both a shipyard and defensive station for the system's modest fleet. Their cover story was simple and believable. Marcus presented himself as a Confederation cultural attaché conducting routine assessments of member world integration. His team posed as specialists in various fields, all working to ensure that Kepler sector worlds were receiving adequate support for their development needs. The deception was made easier by the fact that such missions were common, and the Confederation genuinely did provide technical assistance to developing worlds, assistance that came with increasingly intrusive oversight. The planetary government of Kepler Prime received them with the careful politeness that marked all Confederation diplomatic interactions. President Velkara, a middle-aged woman whose species shared common ancestry with humans, greeted them personally at the orbital station. "Welcome to Kepler Prime," she said, her translator rendering her words in perfect standard galactic. "We are honored by the Confederation's continued interest in our development." Marcus studied the president carefully, noting the subtle tension in her posture and the way her aide's eyes never quite met his. These were people under stress, trying to maintain appearances while dealing with some underlying crisis. "The honor is ours, President Velkara. The Confederation values all its member worlds, and we're here to ensure you have everything you need for continued prosperity." The formal reception was held in the station's main conference center, a modest facility that nonetheless showed impressive attention to detail. The walls displayed artwork from across the Kepler sector representing the cultural diversity of 12 different worlds. Marcus recognized the subtle message. This wasn't just about Kepler Prime, but about the entire sector's shared identity. During the reception, Marcus mingled with local officials, while his team gathered intelligence through their respective specialties. Lieutenant Sarah Kine positioned herself near the largest groups, her telepathic abilities allowing her to sample the emotional undercurrents of the gathering. Dr. Lyra Venn engaged in technical discussions about local infrastructure, probing for signs of military buildup or defensive preparations. Sergeant Bractor remained near Marcus, his imposing presence serving as both protection and intimidation. What Marcus discovered during these casual conversations was both troubling and encouraging. The Kepler sector worlds were indeed coordinating with each other, but not in the way Confederation intelligence suggested. Rather than planning rebellion, they were attempting to form a mutual defense pact within the framework of existing law. Their goal wasn't independence, it was protection against the kind of exploitation they had observed in other developing sectors. The revelation came during a private conversation with Dr. Jen Moore, Kepler Prime's chief scientist, and a woman whose intelligence reminded Marcus of his own mother. She had requested a meeting to discuss potential collaboration on advanced propulsion research, but her real purpose became clear once they were alone. "Captain Chen," she said, her voice carefully modulated to avoid triggering surveillance systems. "May I speak freely?" Marcus nodded, though he maintained his official demeanor. "Of course, Doctor. This mission is about open communication. We are aware of what happened to the Vega sector after their attempted withdrawal from the Confederation. 3 worlds reduced to resource extraction colonies, their governments replaced by Confederation administrators, their populations relocated for efficiency optimization." Dr. Pete Janmore paused, studying Marcus's face for any reaction. "We have no desire to share their fate." The reference to Vega sector hit Marcus like a physical blow. Those files had been classified beyond his security clearance, but the broad outlines were known to anyone who paid attention to galactic politics. The sector had attempted legal withdrawal from the Confederation 5 years ago, citing violations of their membership agreement. The response had been swift and brutal, though officially described as humanitarian intervention. "I'm not familiar with those specific details," Marcus said carefully, "but I can assure you that the Confederation is committed to the sovereignty of all member worlds within legal frameworks." Janmore smiled sadly. "Legal frameworks can be interpreted flexibly when convenient. We seek only to ensure that our interpretation of the law carries equal weight with others." That evening, Marcus convened a team meeting in their assigned quarters aboard the orbital station. The rooms were comfortable but clearly monitored, requiring him to balance his role as team leader with the need to gather authentic intelligence. "Initial assessment?" he asked, settling into his chair as the others arranged themselves around the small conference table. Lieutenant Sarah Kine spoke first, her telepathic senses having provided the most direct intelligence. "Emotional patterns consistent with organized resistance planning. high levels of stress and determination, but also fear. They are committed to some course of action, but aware of significant risks. Dr. Lyra Van consulted her notes. Cultural analysis supports resistance theory. These societies show strong emphasis on collective decision-making and shared responsibility. The sector-wide coordination appears to be genuine cooperation rather than domination by any single world. Sergeant Bractor's assessment was characteristically direct. Defensive preparations visible but not aggressive. Increased patrol activity, enhanced communication systems, but no obvious military buildup. They are preparing to resist rather than attack. Marcus processed this information while maintaining his conditioned persona. Recommendations? Standard intervention protocols should be sufficient. Lieutenant Sarah Kine replied. Economic pressure combined with political isolation will likely force compliance within 6 months. Military action should be unnecessary if we act quickly. The casual way she discussed destroying the independence of 12 worlds made Marcus's stomach clench, but he kept his expression neutral. Dr. Lyra Van, do you concur? The Hejimi scientist hesitated, and Marcus caught a flicker of genuine emotion behind her controlled facade. The cultural factors may make these populations more resistant to conventional pressure than analysis suggests. They appear to view sector autonomy as a matter of species survival rather than political preference, meaning they may be willing to accept significant sacrifice to maintain their independence. Economic pressure could strengthen their resolve rather than weaken it. Sergeant Bractor leaned forward, his massive frame making the furniture creak. Then direct action becomes necessary. Quick, decisive military intervention prevents prolonged suffering. Marcus felt a chill at the sergeant's matter-of-fact discussion of conquest. This was what the conditioning produced. Soldiers who could plan the destruction of entire civilizations while genuinely believing they were acting from compassion. It was a perfect system for maintaining imperial control while preserving the moral self-image of the enforcers. Let's continue gathering intelligence before making recommendations, Marcus decided. We need a complete picture of their capabilities and intentions before proposing any action. Over the following days, Marcus used his position to conduct a more thorough investigation of the Kepler sector's actual situation. What he discovered was both impressive and tragic. The 12 worlds had indeed formed a mutual defense compact, but their preparations were entirely legal under Confederation law. They had pooled resources for infrastructure development, established communication networks for trade coordination, and created joint scientific research programs. The rebellion existed only in the paranoid imagination of Confederation leadership, who saw any sign of independent organization as a threat to their control. The Kepler worlds weren't planning to leave the Confederation. They were trying to create a model for how member worlds could maintain their sovereignty while meeting their treaty obligations. It was exactly the kind of innovative thinking that made them dangerous to the established order. Marcus's investigation also revealed the true scope of Confederation surveillance and control. Every member world was subject to constant monitoring through economic data, communication intercepts, and the reports of cultural attachés like himself. The intelligence apparatus was vast and sophisticated, designed to detect any sign of independent action. More disturbing was the discovery of how that intelligence was used. Marcus gained access to classified files detailing intervention operations across the galaxy. World after world had been subjected to correction when their governments showed too much independence. The methods were always different. Economic sanctions here, political manipulation there, direct military action when subtlety failed, but the results were always the same. The independent voices were silenced, and the Confederation's control grew stronger. The most shocking revelation came during his 5th day on Kepler Prime. Dr. Lyra Van requested a private meeting, her usual scientific composure replaced by barely controlled anxiety. "Captain Chen," she said once they were alone in a secured conference room, "I need to share something with you, but I'm not sure how to proceed." Marcus sensed an opportunity but moved carefully. "What's troubling you, Doctor?" "They are just coordinating for mutual defense. They're actively working to develop technologies that could level the playing field with more advanced Confederation members. What kind of technologies? Lyra Venn activated a portable holographic display showing technical schematics that made Marcus's breath catch. Distributed artificial intelligence networks that could enhance the cognitive abilities of entire populations. Advanced manufacturing systems that could produce Confederation-level technology using local resources. Most significantly, communication systems that would be immune to Confederation surveillance methods. The implications were staggering. If successful, these developments would fundamentally alter the balance of power in the galaxy. Developing worlds would no longer be dependent on more advanced civilizations for critical technologies. The Confederation's control mechanisms would become obsolete virtually overnight. This is significant, Marcus said carefully. Have you reported these findings? That's what troubles me, Dr. Fee. Lyra Venn replied, her scientific training apparently providing some resistance to her conditioning. Standard protocol requires immediate reporting of any technological developments that could impact Confederation security. But these people aren't developing weapons. They're developing freedom. Marcus felt a moment of genuine hope. Perhaps the conditioning process wasn't as perfect as the Confederation believed. If Dr. Lyra Venn could recognize the moral implications of their mission, others might as well. What do you think we should do? He asked. The question hung in the air between them, representing a choice that would define both their futures. Dr. Lyra Venn stared at the holographic display, her expression cycling through confusion, fear, and determination. I think, she said finally, that we need to consider whether our loyalty should be to the Confederation's authority or to the principles that authority is supposed to represent. Marcus nodded slowly, recognizing the courage it took for her to voice such thoughts. That's a dangerous question, Doctor. All important questions are dangerous, she replied. The question is whether we have the courage to face the answers. That night, Marcus lay in his quarters, staring at the ceiling while his mind raced through possibilities. The situation was more complex than he had anticipated. The Kepler sector wasn't just planning to resist Confederation control. They were developing the means to make such resistance viable. Their success would inspire similar movements across the galaxy, potentially triggering the collapse of the entire Imperial system. The Confederation leadership would never allow such a development. When they learned the true nature of what was happening in the Kepler sector, the response would be swift and brutal. Marcus had perhaps days before his report was expected, and that report would determine the fate of 12 worlds and billions of lives. He could file an accurate report and watch as the Confederation destroyed another group of worlds whose only crime was wanting to determine their own destiny. He could falsify his findings and buy the Kepler world's time, though discovery would mean his own death and the eventual destruction of everything he was trying to protect. Or he could choose a third option, one that would surprise everyone and potentially change the balance of power in the galaxy. Marcus Chen had spent his career following orders and trusting in the system's basic fairness. The conditioning process had opened his eyes to the truth about galactic politics, but it had also given him something unexpected, the perfect position to strike back at the forces trying to control humanity and every other species in the galaxy. His next move would indeed stun the worlds, but first he needed to ensure he had allies who could help him execute it successfully. Dr. Lyra Venn was a beginning, but he would need much more if he was going to challenge an empire that had controlled the galaxy for centuries. The game was becoming more complex, but for the first time since his forced conditioning, Marcus felt like he was playing to win. The breakthrough came during Marcus's third week on Kepler Prime, in the most unexpected place possible, a children's playground in the planetary capital's Central District. He had been conducting what appeared to be routine cultural observation when he noticed something that changed everything. The children were playing a game that shouldn't have been possible. Marcus watched from a nearby bench as a group of youngsters from different species engaged in what looked like an elaborate form of telepathic tag. The human children were keeping up with their Zenitharian hegemony playmates in activities that required mental communication, something that should have been impossible given humanity's lack of natural telepathic abilities. Dr. Lyra Venn noticed his attention and moved to join him on the bench. Over the past week, she had become his unofficial co-conspirator, her scientific curiosity overriding her conditioning when faced with the moral implications of their mission. "Fascinating, isn't it?" she said, settling beside him while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation. "The neural enhancement technologies they've developed aren't just about improving existing abilities. They're about granting entirely new ones." Marcus kept his expression neutral for the benefit of any surveillance systems, but his mind was racing. Enhancement implies modification of existing neural structures. What we're observing suggests something more fundamental. They've found a way to artificially induce telepathic abilities in non-telepathic species. The implications are staggering. Dr. Lyra Venn paused, watching a human child successfully predict and dodge an attack from a Zenithari playmate. If they can grant telepathy, what other abilities might they be able to enhance or create? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities. Marcus had already seen evidence of the Kepler sector's advanced manufacturing capabilities and distributed intelligence networks. If they had also solved the problem of artificial telepathy, they were far closer to technological independence than even he had realized. That evening, Marcus made a decision that would have horrified his superiors, but felt absolutely right to his unconditioned mind. Instead of maintaining his cover and gathering intelligence from a distance, he arranged a private meeting with President Velkara under the pretense of discussing enhanced cultural exchange programs. The president received him in her private office, a modest space that reflected the practical values of her administration. Unlike the ornate chambers favored by Confederation officials, this room was designed for work rather than intimidation. Technical displays showed real-time data from across the sector, while the walls bore simple artwork created by local children. "Captain Chen," President Velkara said, gesturing for him to take a seat across from her desk, "I hope your assessment of our world has been favorable." Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing that this conversation would either open new possibilities or end his mission and possibly his life. "Madam President, I believe we need to speak openly about the real situation facing the Kepler sector." The president's posture stiffened slightly, but her expression remained diplomatically neutral. "I'm not sure what you mean, Captain. You know I'm not really a cultural attaché, and I know you're not just developing improved trade relationships with your neighbors." Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. "The question is whether we can find a way to serve the interests of both our peoples without destroying each other." For a long moment, President Velkara studied Marcus's face, clearly trying to determine whether this was some kind of trap. Finally, she activated a privacy field that would defeat most surveillance systems and folded her hands on her desk. "What do you know about our activities?" she asked. "I know you've developed technologies that could revolutionize the balance of power in the galaxy. I know the Confederation leadership views this as a threat to their control, and I know that when my report is filed, they will take action to prevent those technologies from spreading." The president nodded slowly. "And what do you intend to report?" Marcus took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would commit him to a course of action from which there would be no return. "That depends on what you're willing to offer in exchange for my cooperation." The negotiation that followed was unlike anything in Marcus's military experience. President Velkara proved to be a skilled diplomat who understood both the stakes involved and the narrow window of opportunity they faced. Over the course of 3 hours, they developed the framework for an agreement that could change the course of galactic history. The Kepler sector would share their advanced technologies with humanity, beginning with the neural enhancement systems that could grant humans telepathic abilities. In exchange, Marcus would use his position within the Cosmic Union to provide intelligence about Confederation plans and, when possible, to sabotage operations directed against independent worlds. "You understand the risks you're taking," President Velkara warned as they finalized their agreement. The Confederation doesn't tolerate betrayal, even from their most trusted agents. I understand, Marcus replied. But I also understand what happens to species that allow themselves to remain dependent on others for their freedom. Humanity learned that lesson the hard way during our early space exploration. The president smiled for the first time during their meeting. Your reputation for independence preceded you, Captain. It's one reason we hoped this conversation might be possible. You knew I wasn't really conditioned? We suspected. Your psychological profile suggested someone whose core values would resist modification, and our observations of your behavior confirmed it. The neural conditioning appears perfect on the surface, but there are subtle patterns that suggest deeper resistance. Marcus felt a mix of relief and concern. If the Kepler worlds could detect his deception, it was possible others could as well. How many people know about this? Only myself and our chief scientist, Dr. Jen Moore. We judged the risk acceptable given the potential benefits of cooperation. The next phase of the plan required Marcus to convincingly play his role as a conditioned Confederation agent while secretly working to undermine their operation. It was a delicate balance that required him to provide enough legitimate intelligence to maintain his cover while ensuring that information couldn't be used to harm the worlds he was now committed to protecting. His first step was to influence his team's assessment of the situation. Dr. Lyraven was already showing signs of independent thinking, making her a potential ally. Lieutenant Sarah Kinn's telepathic abilities made her dangerous, but her conditioning was so complete that she might not recognize his deception if he was careful. Sergeant Bracktor presented the greatest challenge. His loyalty was absolute, and his combat abilities made him a threat if he discovered the truth. Marcus began by subtly redirecting the team's investigation toward less sensitive areas. When Lieutenant Sarah Kinn reported detecting signs of organized planning among the local population, he suggested that such coordination was natural for worlds facing economic challenges and probably represented nothing more than enhanced trade relationships. The telepathic signatures suggest more complex coordination than simple commerce, the Xenothari officer argued during one of their daily briefings. Complexity doesn't necessarily indicate hostility, Marcus replied, drawing on his knowledge of human psychology to construct a convincing argument. These are relatively young civilizations dealing with rapid technological advancement. Increased coordination could be a natural response to development stress. Lyraven supported his interpretation, her scientific background lending credibility to their assessment. Cultural anthropology supports Captain Chen's analysis. Societies experiencing rapid change often develop enhanced cooperation mechanisms as a stabilization strategy. Sergeant Bracktor remained skeptical. Cooperation can mask preparation for resistance. We should recommend increased surveillance regardless of current threat assessment. Marcus felt a chill at the suggestion, knowing that enhanced surveillance would quickly reveal the true scope of the Kepler sector's activities. Additional surveillance resources would need to be diverted from other operations. Unless we can demonstrate clear evidence of hostile intent, Command is unlikely to approve such measures. The delicate balance continued for another week while Marcus worked to establish secure communication channels with the Kepler resistance. Dr. Jen Moore proved invaluable in this effort, using her scientific contacts to create a network that could coordinate activities across all 12 worlds without triggering Confederation monitoring systems. The breakthrough in their cooperation came when Dr. Jen Moore introduced Marcus to the actual scope of their technological development. In a hidden facility beneath Kepler Prime's capital city, he was shown prototypes that represented advances far beyond what he had imagined possible. We call it the Liberation Protocol, Dr. Jen Moore explained as she led him through chambers filled with advanced equipment. The neural enhancement technology you observed is just the beginning. We're developing systems that can grant any species the advanced capabilities traditionally associated with the elder races. Marcus stared at a demonstration unit that could temporarily grant him the Vorthak ability to manipulate gravitational fields. This is impossible. These abilities are based on fundamental biological differences between species. End quote. That's what the Confederation wants everyone to believe. Dr. Jen Moore replied. The truth is that most advanced abilities can be replicated through sufficiently sophisticated technology. The elder races maintain their dominance by ensuring younger species never develop the knowledge necessary to challenge them. The implications were staggering. If the Liberation Protocol could be widely distributed, it would eliminate the biological advantages that formed the foundation of Confederation power. A human equipped with artificial telepathy would be the equal of any Xenothari. A hegemony scientist with gravitational manipulation abilities would match any Vorthak engineer. How close are you to full deployment? Marcus asked. 6 months for sector-wide implementation. 2 years for galaxy-wide distribution if we can establish the necessary infrastructure. Dr. T. Jenmore paused, her expression growing serious. But only if we can prevent Confederation interference during the critical development phase. Marcus understood the challenge they faced. The Confederation would never allow such technology to be developed freely. Once they realized what was happening in the Kepler sector, the response would be swift and brutal. Traditional rebellions could be crushed through superior military force, but this represented something far more threatening, the democratization of power itself. You'll need allies with access to Confederation intelligence and the ability to act without detection, Marcus said. We were hoping you might help with that, Dr. Jen Moore replied. The conversation was interrupted by an emergency signal from his team. Lieutenant Sarakine's voice came through his communicator with urgent intensity. Captain Chen, please report to the orbital station immediately. We have received priority communications from command, requiring immediate response. Marcus felt his carefully constructed plans beginning to unravel. Priority communications meant either a significant development elsewhere or new intelligence about the Kepler sector that demanded immediate action. Either way, his window for subtle manipulation was closing rapidly. I have to go, he told Dr. Jen Moore. Continue your work, but be prepared for the situation to change quickly. The return journey to the orbital station took 20 minutes that felt like hours. Marcus used the time to prepare responses for various scenarios while hoping that his deception could withstand whatever crisis had prompted the urgent communication. Lieutenant Sarakin met him at the docking bay, her usual composed demeanor. Captain, we have received intelligence that changes everything. Command has detected coordinated activities across multiple sectors that suggest a galaxy-wide conspiracy against Confederation authority. Marcus's blood turned cold. If Confederation intelligence had detected the broader scope of the independence movement, the reprisals would be catastrophic. What kind of activities? Simultaneous technological developments, coordinated communication networks, and resource-sharing agreements that appear designed to reduce dependence on Confederation infrastructure. Lieutenant Sarakin paused, her large eyes reflecting the docking bay's lights. Command believes the Kepler sector is a test case for galaxy-wide rebellion. The situation had just become far more complex and dangerous than Marcus had anticipated. What he had believed was a localized independence movement was apparently part of a coordinated effort spanning multiple sectors. The stakes were no longer just the freedom of 12 worlds. They involved the potential transformation of galactic civilization itself. What are our new orders? Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. Immediate escalation to active intervention protocols. We are to identify and neutralize the leadership structure before this conspiracy can spread further. Sergeant Bractor emerged from the shadows, his massive frame blocking much of the corridor. Military assets are being deployed to support our operation. Military intervention would mean the destruction of everything the Kepler worlds had worked to build, along with the elimination of their chance to develop technologies that could level the galactic playing field. Unless he could find a way to warn them and help them prepare, the Liberation Protocol would die before it could change the balance of power. How long do we have before the military assets arrive? He asked. 72 hours, Lieutenant Sarakine replied. Command wants the leadership structure identified and isolated before direct action begins. Marcus had faced impossible odds before, but never with stakes this high or resources this limited. His next moves would determine not just his own fate, but the future of every species in the galaxy that dreamed of true independence. The game had just entered its most dangerous phase, and Marcus Chen was about to discover whether one human with the right allies could stand against an empire that had controlled the galaxy for millennia. Marcus stood in the orbital station's command center, watching the tactical display that showed the approaching Confederation fleet with a mixture of dread and determination. 36 hours had passed since receiving his new orders, and the window for subtle action was rapidly closing. The fleet's arrival would bring Admiral Korathnal himself, along with enough firepower to sterilize entire worlds if the situation demanded it. Dr. Lyraven approached him with a datapad, her scientific composure masking the urgency in her voice. "Captain, I've completed my analysis of the technological developments. The implications are even more significant than we initially assessed." Marcus accepted the pad, aware that Lieutenant Sarah Kine was monitoring their interaction from across the command center. The report looked routine on the surface, standard xenotechnology assessment with proper scientific methodology, but Marcus recognized the coded language they had developed for sensitive communications. "Interesting conclusions, Doctor," he said for the benefit of their observers. "The technological advancement appears more sophisticated than initial surveys suggested. Indeed, the distributed intelligence networks show integration patterns that could revolutionize information processing across multiple sectors." Dr. Lyraven paused meaningfully. The implications for Confederation security protocols could be substantial. Marcus understood her real message. The Liberation Protocol was ahead of schedule and ready for emergency deployment. If they could buy the Kepler worlds just 48 more hours, the neural enhancement technology could be distributed widely enough to make military suppression far more difficult. The challenge was creating that delay without revealing his true loyalties. "Sergeant Bractor," Marcus called to the massive Corvani warrior, "I want enhanced surveillance of all major population centers. If there's organized resistance, we need to identify the leadership structure before the fleet arrives." The sergeant's scarred features showed approval at the aggressive approach. "Surveillance teams are already in position. Should we begin active interrogation of suspected collaborators?" "Not yet. Let's gather more intelligence before we tip our hand." Marcus turned to Lieutenant Sarah Kine, whose telepathic abilities made her both valuable and dangerous. "I want you to focus on the government districts. If there's coordinated planning, the emotional signatures should be strongest there." The Xenothari officer nodded, her large eyes reflecting the command center's displays. "I will begin deep scans immediately. Should I coordinate with Confederation intelligence for background analysis?" Confederation intelligence had resources that could quickly uncover the true scope of the Kepler conspiracy, potentially revealing his own involvement. "Negative. This operation is classified at the highest levels. We maintain communication blackout except for emergency situations." It was a dangerous lie, but one that might buy crucial time. By isolating his team from outside intelligence sources, Marcus could control the information flow and delay the discovery of facts that would trigger immediate military action. Over the following 12 hours, Marcus engaged in the most complex deception of his career. He had to appear to be conducting a thorough investigation while actually protecting his targets, gathering intelligence that looked authentic while avoiding information that would doom the people he was trying to save. The breakthrough came when Lieutenant Sarah Kine reported detecting what appeared to be a major planning session in the planetary government complex. Multiple high-level officials showing stress patterns consistent with crisis management, she reported during their evening briefing. The emotional signatures suggest they are responding to an immediate threat. Marcus felt his stomach drop. The Kepler leadership was undoubtedly reacting to intelligence about the approaching Confederation fleet, but he couldn't reveal that knowledge without exposing himself. "Recommendations?" he asked. "Direct confrontation. If we can force them to reveal their plans, we can assess the true scope of any conspiracy." Sergeant Bractor's eagerness for action was evident in his posture. Interrogation protocols are authorized under emergency provisions. Lyra Venn interjected, providing Marcus with the opening he needed. These are still officially friendly governments. Direct interrogation could be seen as an act of war, potentially escalating the situation beyond our control. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Dr. Lyra Venn raises a valid point. Let's try a different approach. He activated the holographic display showing the sector's political structure. Instead of confrontation, what if we offered assistance? Lieutenant Sarakine looked confused. Assistance, sir? Think about it. If they're planning some kind of resistance, they're probably feeling overwhelmed by the scope of their challenge. If we approach them as Confederation representatives offering help with their problems, they might reveal their true concerns without realizing it. It was a thin rationalization, but it gave Marcus the pretext he needed to make contact with the Kepler leadership while maintaining his cover. More importantly, it would allow him to provide intelligence about the approaching fleet. The emergency meeting with President Velcara took place in a secure conference room beneath the planetary government complex. Marcus attended with Dr. Lyra Venn, whose scientific credentials made her the ideal choice for what appeared to be a technical consultation. Madam President, Marcus began once the privacy screens were activated, our surveillance has detected signs of significant stress among your population. The Confederation is concerned that you may be facing challenges we could help address. President Velcara's expression remained diplomatically neutral, but Marcus could see the tension in her posture. We appreciate the Confederation's concern, Captain. However, I'm not sure what challenges you're referring to. Intelligence suggests coordinated planning activities that could indicate external pressures or internal conflicts. Marcus leaned forward, knowing he was walking a tightrope between maintaining his cover and providing crucial information. If there are threats to sector stability, the Confederation has resources that could help resolve them. The President exchanged glances with Dr. Jen Moore, who had joined the meeting as Chief Scientific Advisor. After a moment of silent communication, she made her decision. Captain, we have been dealing with some unusual developments that may require outside expertise to resolve properly. She was giving him an opening to provide warning while maintaining the fiction of Confederation cooperation. What kind of developments? We have detected what appears to be increased military activity in neighboring sectors. Long-range sensors show fleet movements that suggest possible hostile intent. President Velcara paused, studying Marcus's face. We are concerned that someone may be planning action against our worlds. The coded language was clear. They knew about the approaching Confederation fleet and were hoping for confirmation or additional intelligence. Marcus had to provide that information without revealing how he had obtained it. That's disturbing news, he said carefully. Has this military activity shown any specific targeting patterns? Jen Moore activated a holographic display showing sensor readings from across the sector. The formations appear designed for rapid deployment against multiple targets simultaneously. The tactical configuration suggests preparation for occupation rather than defense. Marcus studied the display, recognizing the approach vectors of Admiral Koreth Null's fleet. How long until these forces reach positions where they could threaten your worlds? President Velcara replied, We are hoping the Confederation might have intelligence about the intentions behind these movements. This was Marcus's moment of truth. He could maintain his cover and allow events to unfold according to Confederation plans, or he could trust these people with information that would mark him as a traitor to everything he had supposedly sworn to protect. Madam President, he said quietly, I think we need to discuss some classified information that could help clarify the situation. What followed was the most dangerous conversation of Marcus's life. Speaking in careful euphemisms and coded language, he revealed the true nature of his mission and the approaching Confederation response. He explained that intelligence had detected coordinated activities across multiple sectors that were being interpreted as preparation for galaxy-wide rebellion. The response will be immediate and overwhelming, he warned. The Confederation leadership believes they are facing an existential threat to galactic stability. They will not hesitate to use maximum force to prevent the spread of what they see as dangerous ideas. President Valcara absorbed this information with the composure of a leader who had prepared for this moment. What would you recommend as our best course of action? Disperse your research and development assets immediately. Whatever technologies you've been working on need to be distributed as widely as possible before they can be suppressed. Marcus paused, knowing his next words would commit him irrevocably. And prepare for the possibility that some of your worlds may need to be evacuated. Jan Moore leaned forward. Captain, are you suggesting we abandon our homes? I'm suggesting you preserve what matters most. Technologies can be recreated, but people can't be replaced. If the Confederation believes you represent a threat to their control, they will eliminate that threat by any means necessary. The meeting ended with agreements for further cooperation, disguised as routine diplomatic protocols. Marcus returned to the orbital station knowing he had crossed a line from which there was no return. He was now actively working against Confederation interests, using his position and resources to help their targets escape destruction. The next 24 hours were a frantic race against time. Marcus had to maintain the appearance of conducting his investigation while actually helping coordinate evacuation efforts and technology dispersal. Dr. Lyra Venn proved invaluable in this effort, using her scientific contacts to establish communication networks that bypassed Confederation monitoring. The most dangerous moment came when Lieutenant Sarakine reported detecting unusual activity patterns that suggested large-scale population movements. The emotional signatures are consistent with emergency evacuation procedures, she reported during their final briefing before the fleet's arrival. It appears the local governments are responding to some perceived threat. This confirms hostile intent. We should begin detention procedures for government officials immediately. Marcus felt the walls closing in, but managed to maintain his composure. Let's wait for Admiral Korathnal's arrival before taking irreversible action. If we're wrong about their intentions, premature arrests could create diplomatic complications. It was a thin argument, but it bought a few more precious hours. Marcus used that time to coordinate final evacuation efforts while preparing for what he knew would be his last mission as a Confederation agent. The Admiral's flagship Infinite Authority dropped out of hyperspace exactly on schedule, accompanied by a battle fleet capable of reducing entire star systems to rubble. Within hours, the massive vessel had established orbit around Kepler Prime, its presence sending unmistakable signals about Confederation intentions. Admiral Korathnal's first communication was brief and direct. Captain Chen, report to my flagship immediately for mission briefing. Marcus gathered his team and prepared to face the most dangerous challenge of his career. The Admiral was known throughout the Confederation as a brilliant strategist and utterly ruthless enforcer of galactic order. If anyone could detect his deception, it would be Korathnal. The flagship's shuttle bay was a testament to Confederation military power, vast enough to hold a dozen smaller vessels with launch systems that could deploy entire invasion forces within minutes. Marcus and his team were escorted through corridors lined with armed guards and defensive systems that could repel boarding actions from the most advanced military forces. Admiral Korathnal received them in his private briefing chamber, a space designed to intimidate through its stark efficiency. The Vorthak commander stood nearly 3 meters tall, his crystalline skin reflecting the room's harsh lighting, while his gravitational abilities created subtle distortions in the air around him. Captain Chen, the Admiral said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, your preliminary reports have been most illuminating. However, I have received additional intelligence that suggests a more complex situation than initially assessed. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but maintained his military bearing. What kind of additional intelligence, sir? Communications intercepts indicate that the conspiracy extends far beyond this sector. We are facing the most serious threat to galactic stability in centuries. The Admiral activated a holographic display showing star maps with highlighted sectors across the galaxy. Your investigation has uncovered what appears to be the testing ground for galaxy-wide rebellion. The scope of the display was staggering, Dozens of sectors showed signs of coordinated activity, suggesting that the independence movement was far larger and more organized than even Marcus had realized. "What are our orders, sir?" he asked. Admiral Korathnal's expression was grim. "Total suppression. We will make an example of this sector that will discourage similar activities elsewhere. The operation begins in 6 hours." Marcus stared at the tactical display, showing targets across all 12 Kepler worlds. This wasn't going to be a limited military action. It was genocide disguised as peacekeeping. Everything he had worked to protect was about to be destroyed, and his position as a trusted Confederation agent meant he would be expected to participate in the destruction, unless he made a choice that would surprise everyone and change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind, "I request permission to coordinate the final intelligence sweep before operations begin. We want to ensure maximum effectiveness." The Admiral nodded approvingly. "Granted. You have 4 hours to complete your assessment. After that, this sector becomes a lesson in the consequences of defying Confederation authority." Marcus saluted and left the briefing chamber, knowing he had just committed himself to the most desperate gamble of his life. In 4 hours, he would either help save 12 worlds and potentially change galactic history, or he would die as a traitor to the only civilization humanity had ever known. The next move in the game would indeed stun the worlds, but whether it led to victory or destruction remained to be seen. Marcus Chen stood in the Auxiliary Command Center of the Infinite Authority, surrounded by holographic displays showing the tactical deployment of the most powerful military force ever assembled for a single operation. 43 starships capable of sterilizing entire continents waited for his final intelligence assessment before beginning what Admiral Korathnal euphemistically called stability restoration procedures. 12 worlds would begin dying unless Marcus could execute the most audacious plan in human history. Dr. Lyra Van worked at a nearby station, her fingers dancing across control interfaces while she ostensibly analyzed final intelligence data. In reality, she was coordinating with resistance cells across the Kepler sector through communication channels so sophisticated they appeared as background static to Confederation sensors. The past weeks had transformed the hegemony scientist into something her conditioning had never anticipated. A revolutionary whose loyalty to scientific truth trumped her programmed obedience to authority. Lieutenant Sarah Kin monitored telepathic communications from the population centers below, her enhanced abilities providing what appeared to be crucial intelligence about civilian movements and government activities. She remained unaware that the desperate evacuation planning she detected was actually the coordinated deployment of Liberation Protocol technology to hidden facilities across the galaxy. Sergeant Braktor supervised weapons and security systems, his massive frame moving efficiently through preparation routines that would soon be turned against his own command structure. The Corvani warrior's conditioning remained intact, but Marcus had carefully positioned him where his abilities could be redirected when the moment came. The key to Marcus's plan lay in something Admiral Korathnal had mentioned almost casually during their briefing. The operation's unprecedented scope required centralized coordination through the flagship's command systems. Every ship in the fleet would execute its orders based on tactical data processed through the Infinite Authority's main computers. It was a logical approach that ensured perfect timing and maximum efficiency. It was also the perfect vulnerability for someone with Marcus's access and knowledge. "Captain?" "Doctor," Lyra Vin called softly. "I've completed analysis of the communication patterns. The data suggests all primary targets will be accessible for coordinated action." Marcus understood her coded message. The Liberation Protocol technology had been successfully distributed to resistance cells throughout the galaxy. When activated, it would grant enhanced capabilities to species that had never possessed them, fundamentally altering the balance of power that kept the Confederation in control. "Excellent work, Doctor. Transmit the final coordinates to Fleet Command." Marcus turned to Lieutenant Sarah Kin. "What's the status of civilian population centers?" "Emotional patterns suggest widespread awareness of impending danger, but no signs of organized military resistance," the Xenothari officer reported. They appear to be relying primarily on evacuation rather than confrontation. Perfect. The Kepler worlds were following his advice, dispersing their populations and critical resources rather than attempting a conventional military defense they couldn't win. What the Confederation fleet would find when they began their attack would be largely empty cities and abandoned facilities, strategically worthless targets that would raise questions about the intelligence behind the operation. "Sergeant, weapons status report," Marcus requested. Brektor consulted his displays with professional efficiency. "All fleet units report ready status. Orbital bombardment platforms are positioned for maximum coverage. Ground assault forces are prepared for immediate deployment following initial strikes." Marcus nodded, though his stomach clenched at the casual discussion of planetary destruction. "And internal security? Standard protocols active. All personnel movements monitored, communication systems encrypted, access controls at maximum security levels." The sergeant paused, his scarred features showing slight confusion. "Sir, I'm detecting some unusual activity in the computer core. Technical personnel are running diagnostic routines that weren't scheduled." This was the moment Marcus had been working toward for weeks. The technical personnel were actually Dr. Genmore and a team of Kepler scientists who had infiltrated the flagship using falsified credentials and neural suppression technology that masked their true identities from telepathic detection. They were currently installing modifications to the ship's central computer systems that would transform the coming attack into something entirely different. "Probably routine maintenance," Marcus said casually. "With an operation this complex, the technical teams are being extra cautious about system reliability. What those teams were actually doing would have horrified Admiral Korethnal if he had understood the implications. Instead of installing weapons guidance updates, they were uploading Liberation Protocol activation codes into every communication and targeting system in the fleet. When the attack began, those systems would broadcast enhancement frequencies to every world in the galaxy, triggering the simultaneous activation of technologies that would grant advanced abilities to billions of beings. The Confederation's own attack fleet would become the delivery system for their empire's destruction. Marcus activated his personal communicator, ostensibly to coordinate final preparations with fleet commanders. "All units, this is Captain Shen. Begin final targeting sequence on my mark. Execute Operation Stability Restoration in exactly 2 hours and 43 minutes. Across the fleet, thousands of officers began implementing orders that would reshape galactic civilization. None of them realized they were about to participate in the most successful rebellion in recorded history. Admiral Korethnal's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "All personnel, this is Admiral Korethnal. In less than 3 hours, we will eliminate a threat to galactic peace that has festered for too long. The conspiracy we face represents the worst kind of chaos, the delusion that lesser civilizations can challenge the natural order that has brought stability to countless worlds. Today, we restore that order and ensure it remains unchallenged for generations to come." Marcus listened to the speech while making final adjustments to his own plans. The Admiral was right about one thing. Today would indeed determine the natural order of galactic civilization. The question was whether that order would be based on the dominance of a few powerful species or the potential of all sapient beings to determine their own destiny. "Dr. Liraven," Marcus called quietly, "are the cultural assessment files ready for transmission?" "Ready and verified, Captain," she replied, though both of them knew the files contained activation codes rather than cultural data. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing his next words would trigger events that could not be undone. "All stations execute final intelligence dissemination protocol. Transmit assessment data to all fleet units and affected worlds immediately." The command seemed routine, a standard procedure for ensuring all forces had complete information before beginning operations. In reality, it sent Liberation Protocol activation codes to every world in the Kepler sector, and dozens of other systems where resistance cells waited for the signal to begin their transformation. Across the galaxy, the revolution began not with violence, but with sudden awakening. On Kepler Prime, children playing in hidden shelters suddenly found themselves able to manipulate gravitational fields like Vorthak engineers. Hegemony scientists working in secret laboratories discovered they could access telepathic networks with the clarity of Xenothari masters. Human technicians maintaining evacuation systems realized they could interface directly with computer networks using abilities that had never existed in their species. The changes weren't limited to the Kepler sector. On Earth, Marcus's own people felt their minds expanding as artificial telepathic abilities activated in neural enhancement centers that had been secretly constructed over the past year. In the outer colonies, human settlements that had struggled with the challenges of frontier life suddenly found themselves able to manipulate matter and energy with powers that rivaled the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. The Confederation's response was swift but confused. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy describing impossible phenomena, entire populations manifesting abilities they had never possessed, technologies activating without explanation, and coordination networks appearing overnight among species that had previously been isolated. Marcus watched the tactical displays as the carefully planned operation began to unravel. Fleet commanders reported sensor anomalies, communication disruptions, and targeting failures that made precise orbital bombardment impossible. What should have been a simple matter of destroying rebellious worlds had become a complex crisis that threatened the foundation of galactic order. Admiral Korethnal stormed into the Auxiliary Command Center, his crystalline features reflecting the chaos displayed on the holographic monitors. "Captain Chen, what is happening to my fleet?" Marcus maintained his composed facade while his heart raced with excitement at seeing his plan unfold. "Sir, we appear to be encountering some kind of coordinated electronic warfare attack. The targets must have developed countermeasures we didn't anticipate." "Don't countermeasures that can affect an entire battle fleet simultaneously?" The Admiral's gravitational abilities created visible distortions in the air around him as his anger intensified. That would require technology beyond anything in their capabilities. Lyra Venn looked up from her station, her expression showing perfectly crafted confusion. "Admiral, I'm detecting energy signatures that don't match any known defensive systems. It's as if the planets themselves are generating some kind of interference field." What she didn't mention was that the interference was actually the mass activation of liberation protocol systems across dozens of worlds, creating a cascade effect that disrupted the technological advantages the Confederation relied upon for control. Lieutenant Sarah Kinn suddenly gasped, her large eyes widening with shock. "Sir, I'm detecting massive changes in telepathic activity throughout the sector. It's like entire populations are suddenly developing mental abilities they never possessed." This was the moment Marcus had been working toward, the point where the Confederation leadership would be forced to confront the reality of what was happening to their carefully controlled galaxy. The Liberation Protocol wasn't just granting new abilities to individual beings. It was fundamentally altering the balance of power that had maintained Imperial control for centuries. "Admiral," Marcus said carefully, "I recommend we withdraw to assess the situation. If these populations have developed new defensive capabilities, continued attack could result in unacceptable losses." Admiral Korethnal's expression showed the first signs of genuine uncertainty Marcus had ever seen from the powerful Vorthak commander. Around them, reports continued arriving from across the fleet, describing system failures, navigational anomalies, and crew members manifesting abilities that violated everything they understood about species limitations. "Sir," Sergeant Bractor called from his weapons station, "I'm receiving reports of similar phenomena from other sectors. Command is requesting immediate communication with all field commanders." The request for communication represented Marcus's greatest danger. Direct contact with Confederation Command would quickly reveal discrepancies in his reports and potentially expose his role in the crisis. He needed to maintain the crisis atmosphere while avoiding external scrutiny. "Communications are being disrupted by the same interference, affecting our targeting systems," he reported. We should focus on stabilizing fleet operations before attempting long-range coordination. Admiral Korath Nal activated his personal communicator, attempting to contact other fleet commanders directly. The static-filled responses he received painted a picture of unprecedented chaos. Ships across the galaxy were reporting similar system failures, crew members developing impossible abilities, and target worlds showing defensive capabilities that shouldn't exist. "This is not possible," the Admiral muttered, his certainty shaken for the first time in his career. The technology required for this kind of coordinated action would take decades to develop and deploy. Marcus seized the opportunity to guide the Admiral's thinking away from the truth, unless they've had assistance from sources we haven't identified. "Sir, what if this conspiracy involves more advanced civilizations than we realized?" It was a masterful misdirection that played on the Admiral's existing prejudices about technological hierarchies, rather than recognizing that the Confederation's victims had developed the means to challenge their oppressors. He would search for external threats that matched his understanding of how galactic power worked. The next several hours were a carefully orchestrated performance as Marcus guided the Confederation response away from effective action, while Liberation Protocol systems continued activating across the galaxy. Every delay bought more time for populations to adapt to their new abilities and coordinate resistance efforts that would have been impossible under the previous balance of power. The true scope of the transformation became apparent when Dr. Tata Genmore contacted the flagship directly, no longer hiding behind false identities or neural suppression technology. "Admiral Korath Nal," her voice came through the communications system with crystal clarity. "This is Dr. Genmore of Kepler Prime. I believe we need to discuss new arrangements for interspecies relations in our galaxy." The Admiral's face went through a range of expressions as he processed the implications of direct contact from his supposed targets. "How are you able to penetrate our communication systems? The same way we've been able to grant telepathic abilities to non-telepathic species, gravitational manipulation to beings who evolved without such capabilities, and enhanced intelligence to populations you've kept deliberately limited for centuries," Dr. Genmore replied. "Technology, Admiral. The great equalizer that you've spent so long ensuring remained unequal." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for the scientist's courage. She was essentially declaring war on the most powerful military force in galactic history while having only recently acquired the means to make such a declaration meaningful. Admiral Korath Nal's response was predictably aggressive. "Your conspiracy ends here. Regardless of what tricks you've developed, this fleet has the firepower to sterilize every world in your sector." "Yes, you do, Dr. Psy," Genmore agreed calmly. "The question is whether you're prepared for the consequences of using it. Admiral, are you familiar with the concept of mutually assured destruction?" The holographic displays around the command center suddenly activated, showing tactical information that made Marcus's breath catch. The Kepler worlds hadn't just developed defensive capabilities. They had created offensive systems using their enhanced technologies. Weapons that could manipulate space-time itself were now targeting the Confederation fleet, held in check only by the understanding that their use would trigger galactic-scale warfare. "Impossible," Admiral Korath Nal whispered, staring at sensor readings that showed his supposedly invincible fleet was now vulnerable to attack from targets he had intended to destroy without resistance. "The technology has always existed," Dr. Genmore explained. "Your species developed gravitational manipulation, the Zenithari perfected telepathic enhancement, the hegemony mastered matter conversion. The only thing that's changed is that these abilities are no longer limited to the species that evolved them naturally. Welcome to the new galactic order, Admiral, one where every civilization has access to the same basic capabilities." Marcus realized he was witnessing the birth of a fundamentally different kind of galactic civilization. The hierarchies based on evolutionary accident that had defined interspecies relations for millennia were dissolving in real time, replaced by a system where technological and social development mattered more than biological heritage. The transformation wasn't limited to military capabilities. Reports continued streaming in from across the galaxy, describing economic systems adapting to new realities, political structures evolving to accommodate enhanced populations, and cultural exchanges accelerating as artificial barriers disappeared. Admiral Koreth Nall faced a choice that would define his species' role in the emerging order. He could escalate to full warfare, potentially destroying much of galactic civilization in the process. Or he could acknowledge that the old system was ending and work to establish new relationships based on equality rather than dominance. "Dr. Jen Moore," the Admiral said finally, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of Imperial authority, "what exactly are you proposing?" "Renegotiation of the fundamental principles governing interspecies relations," she replied. "The Confederation can continue to exist, but as a genuine alliance of equals, rather than a system of control designed to maintain the dominance of a few advanced species." Marcus watched the Admiral process this unprecedented challenge to everything he had spent his career defending. The next few minutes would determine whether the galaxy's transition to a new order would be accomplished through negotiation or through the kind of warfare that could shatter civilizations. "Admiral," Marcus said quietly, "perhaps we should consider the strategic implications of the situation we're facing." It was his final gambit, using his position as a trusted advisor to guide the Confederation toward accepting the new reality rather than destroying it. The irony wasn't lost on him that his success in infiltrating their most elite military unit would ultimately serve to preserve rather than destroy the galactic civilization he had once served faithfully. Admiral Koreth Nall turned to Marcus, his crystalline features reflecting the command center's lights. "Captain Chen, in your assessment, what are our options?" Marcus took a deep breath, knowing his next words would determine the fate of countless worlds. "Sir, I believe we're looking at the most significant shift in galactic balance since the formation of the Confederation itself. We can either adapt to these changes or be swept aside by them." It was the truth, spoken by a human who had learned that sometimes the best way to serve your people was to change the game entirely, rather than simply trying to win within existing rules. The Admiral's decision would echo across the galaxy, but Marcus Chen had already achieved something that would stun worlds indeed. He had proven that one human in the right position at the right time could reshape the destiny of galactic civilization itself. The game was far from over, but for the first time in centuries, every species in the galaxy would be playing as equals. The human forced into a cosmic union. His next move left all worlds stunned. HFY Stories. Best HFY Stories.